Representative Ilhan Omar, DMN, has told a hometown newspaper in Minnesota that she brings the perspective of a foreigner to U.S. foreign policy. The Minneapolis Star-Tribune reported Tuesday, the Somali-born Minnesota Democrat, saying she brings the perspective of a foreigner to her new role, believes that American foreign policy needs to be changed in fundamental ways. She added that U.S. foreign policy needs something equivalent to the Green New Deal. Omar has a history of radical left-wing activism, and brought a long record of anti-Israel, and anti-Semitic, rhetoric to Washington. Before winning a seat in Congress, she had called Israel an apartheid regime, and tweeted, "Israel has hypnotized the world, may Allah awaken the people and help them see the evil doings of Israel." She has since deleted the tweet. She backs the boycott, divestment, sanctions, BDS, movement against Israel, despite telling voters in 2018 that she did not. Nevertheless, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, DCA, appointed Omar to the House Foreign Affairs Committee, where she has continued to cause controversy, not just regarding Israel, but other issues as well. In January, for example, Omar referred to Venezuela's socialist opposition as far-right, and blamed U.S. sanctions for that country's economic woes, rather than the dictatorial behavior or the socialist economic policies of Nicolas Maduro's regime. In April, Omar appeared to downplay the terror attacks of September 11, 2001, saying that some people did something. Omar has also repeatedly used anti-Semitic rhetoric in Congress. In February, she claimed, falsely, that a pro-Israel group, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC, bribed members of Congress to support Israel. "It's all about the Benjamins." She apologized after pressure from party leaders. Later, Omar accused pro-Israel Americans of allegiance to a foreign country and refused to apologize. A subsequent House resolution that was ostensibly to have criticized her anti-Semitism was watered down to criticize all forms of hatred and failed to mention her specifically. Omar even claimed victory after the resolution passed, falsely arguing that it was the first congressional resolution to criticize anti-Muslim bigotry. Nevertheless, Pelosi has rejected calls to remove Omar from the House Foreign Affairs Committee. It is not clear exactly what Omar believes the perspective of a foreigner means. She consistently portrays American influence abroad as a malevolent force, especially when it involves the U.S. military. The Star-Tribune notes, she'd like to see a vastly downscaled U.S. military presence around the world, and much less direct intervention in the domestic politics of other countries. It quotes Omar herself calling for the U.S. to lead with moral conviction through diplomacy, in cultural and economic exchange. The New York Times is facing criticism for publishing an editorial Sunday about the resurgence of anti-Semitism in Europe, in which it suggested Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and U.S. President Donald Trump shared the blame. The editorial, "The old scourge of anti-Semitism rises anew in Europe," responded to what the Times calls the alarming reality that anti-Semitism is sharply on the rise, often from the sadly familiar direction of the far right, but also from Islamists and the far left. The Times acknowledged the contribution of left-wing politicians, such as UK Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn, to the problem. But it also argued, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has not helped matters by finding common cause with nationalist leaders like the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban or President Trump, so long as they do not support a Palestinian state. The implication seemed to be that Orban and Trump are anti-Semites, or that nationalism, by definition, is anti-Semitic. Dr. Michael Oren, the former Israeli ambassador to the U.S. during President Barack Obama's tenure, was furious, noting on Twitter that the Times had omitted left-wing American politicians such as Reps. Ilhan Omar, DMN, and Rashid Tlaib, DME, who have actually used anti-Semitic rhetoric repeatedly. He also referred to the Tim. Just 1 month ago, the Times published a widely denounced cartoon depicting Netanyahu as a dog with a Star of David collar, leading a yarmulke-clad President Trump. Ironically, the editorial concluded, "Speak up, now, when you glimpse evidence of anti-Semitism, particularly within your own ranks, or risk enabling the spread of this deadly virus." Representative John Lewis, DEGA, told MSNBC's Chris Matthews on Hardball on Monday that President Donald Trump feels at home with recent acts of racist violence, citing Trump's comments on the Charlottesville riots in 2017 as proof. Lewis said, "I don't think this president has been helpful. I think he feels at home with what is going on. When he reacted to what was happening in Charlottesville, you know, good people on both sides, I cried. It's not the America that I dream for, the one I was trying to help set right. It's not the America we had during the days of President John F. Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson. It's different. In fact, President Trump had been referring to nonviolent protesters on both sides of the issue of the removal of a statue of Confederate General Robert T. Lee. He specifically excluded neo-Nazis and extremists, whom he said should be condemned totally. Moreover, Trump had delivered a televised statement from the White House the day before. Racism is evil, and those who cause violence in its name are criminals and thugs, including KKK, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and other hate groups are repugnant to everything we hold dear as Americans, he said, as CNN noted. Lewis, prompted by Matthews, who likened him to a character out of the Bible, went on to claim that Trump's election arrested that movement toward goodness and openness that had characterized race relations under his predecessors. In fact, a widely cited Gallup poll shows race relations began to decline during President Barack Obama's second term, in the aftermath of the Trayvon Martin controversy and through the Black Lives Matter movement that followed. In 2010, Lewis was at the center of another alleged racial hoax, when several Democratic members of the Congressional Black Caucus claimed that Tea Party protesters had shouted the N-word at him as he walked through their demonstration on the weekend that Congress was voting on Obamacare. The claim, widely repeated throughout the media and used to malign the Tea Party as racist, was never substantiated. Though Lewis and his colleagues were surrounded by hundreds of video cameras at the time, no video of the alleged incident has ever emerged, despite the late Andrew Breitbart offering to donate $100,000 to the United Negro College Fund in exchange for any video proof of the incident. Lewis, who was infamously beaten during a civil rights march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, in 1965, has been known to put the heroism of his distinguished past to partisan use. In 2008, Lewis cast Senator John McCain, ROS, and Alaska Governor Sarah Palin as racists, likening the Republican presidential ticket to segregationist, Democrat, George Wallace, noting that Wallace created the climate and the conditions that encouraged vicious attacks against innocent Americans and warning the Republican candidates were doing the same, without explaining how. McCain had, in fact, just cited Lewis as one of three leaders whom he would consult for advice once elected. In 2018, after McCain's death, Lewis praised the late senator as a warrior for peace. The family of Eddie Gallagher, the decorated Navy SEAL veteran of 8 combat tours currently facing war crimes charges over allegations that members of Congress say video proves untrue, is speaking out this Memorial Day weekend about the terror Navy prosecutors have put them through. "We've gone through 8 deployments as a family. Raising 3 children and really sacrificing my husband to the war on terror was our goal of achieving victory over what happened on 9/11, Andrea Gallagher said in a Breitbart News Radio exclusive hour-long special on her husband's story that aired on Saturday and Sunday this weekend. "Over the years, we let him go time and time again. Never in a million years would I have foreseen that on his very last combat trip, which was to Mosul where he was previously awarded No. 1 Chief and No. 1 Platoon, he was tasked with clearing Mosul of ISIS, which he succeeded in, and then over a year later he would come back to a disgruntled group of individuals who, once they found out he was yet again being elevated for his twilight tour to a very coveted billet where he would be training every Navy SEAL on the West Coast, and once they found out they were going to be under him again, they set up the plot to take him down. Now, it never would have occurred to them, I don't think, that it could have gone this far," she said. Now, Andrea Gallagher says her family has been put through a horrific nightmare that she called domestic terror at the hands of ISIS naval prosecutors who brought war crimes charges against her husband and for which he has been awaiting trial. "But our family has been entrapped in what I can only call a horrific nightmare, and it definitely has been encompassed by some domestic terror unleashed on our family by ISIS who picked up the case in April of 2018, she said. "They raided our home, pulled out our kids at gunpoint into the streets in their underwear by June. So, less than 60 days on basically just rumors, lies, and hearsay is how they cobbled together this case. Ever since, we have suffered. My husband was taken out of a TBI clinic on September 11, he was thrown in jail and he actually was in jail for 7.5 months before President Trump intervened in March." Gallagher is charged with killing an ISIS fighter while deployed in Iraq during President Donald Trump's administration, even though there is video, according to Representative Duncan Hunter, RCA, and the Gallagher family, that proves Gallagher was actually trying to save the life of the fighter after all of his ISIS comrades in a facility were killed by a U.S.-launched Hellfire missile. "I always like to remind people of the absurdity of the premise," Sean Gallagher, Eddie's brother, said on the Breitbart News Radio Memorial Day weekend special. Eddie is a Navy SEAL, 8 combat tours over there, fighting ISIS, a just relentlessly brutal enemy. They shell a compound. They found out where these guys were hiding in Iraq. Mosul is a pretty densely urban city. It's pretty hard to find out where everybody's hiding. They found them, they Hellfire missiled the compound, a ton of them die. Reports are anywhere from 30 to 50 ISIS fighters died immediately from the Hellfire missile. One survives. It's a 17-year-old. Iraqi special forces were actually the first ones on the scene. They get the 17-year-old, they interview him actually, there's an Iraqi journalist with them. This kid is severely injured. He had a severed artery in his left leg, he has what they call blast lung, so basically a punctured lung after you're in a compound hit by a missile. They interview him. He admits that he's ISIS. He admits that he joined. He tells everybody why he joined. The Iraqis then drag him to the streets and they have him for 2 hours, pretty much, after the shelling. They bring him into the Navy SEAL compound. So this guy has been shelled, he's severely wounded if not mortally wounded. The first one to render medical aid to an ISIS fighter who just hours before was trying to kill Eddie and his men was Eddie. So I always like to tell people the premise. The premise is that my brother, a decorated Navy SEAL, someone who was trained to fight and kill the enemy, almost does, right? They almost killed all of the enemy. All but one died. They bring him into a compound and then instead of killing him, my brother actually tries to save him. Not because he likes him, not because he's compassionate, but because it's tactically smart. They find one ISIS fighter alive, they try to revive and resuscitate him so they can grab valuable intelligence out of him later. So he's sitting there, and there's video. This is what Andrea and Eddie and I have been fighting against since day one. Sean Gallagher added that the government had this exonerating video when it brought the charges against Eddie to begin with, and did it anyway. What I always say about this is it's not spin, it's not context, it's not anything, it's just video, Sean Gallagher said. You can see exactly what happened. What happened is Eddie is providing medical care. He's triaging this ISIS fighter. He flips him over. Members of Congress describe the content where it's a very kinetic compound, everybody is moving around. Eddie cuts the pants away from the ISIS fighter to begin bandaging the wound and that's where the video subsides. This is one of those things that there is a video out there that clearly shows Eddie providing medical care. Prosecutors have had this, the government has had this from day one. They knew that this existed and yet they went forward with this anyway.